It sounds like Hitoshi Sakimoto listened to a few early Danny Elfman soundtracks for Tim Burton films here. Beautiful stuff. This is Devilish, the next possession. Last time on this channel, we took a look at the original Devilish on the Sega Game Gear. If you haven't watched that review, I recommend checking it out, because we'll be referencing it a lot. Devilish the Next Possession, or Bad Omen as it is known in Japan, is a pseudo-sequel remake of that handheld Breakout-inspired action-adventure released for Sega's 16-bit console a year later in 1992. Essentially, it follows the same premise. A jealous demon turns a royal couple into Arkanoid paddles. The blue one is the boy, the pink a girl. It's really silly, but it's something, I guess. The Next Possession is pretty much the same game as its battery-draining handheld counterpart, only worse in nearly every way, and far more challenging. This time, the top paddle can be switched with 2 of the 3 Genesis controller's buttons, while the other changes the speed. It is much quicker to alter these positions on the fly, and the bottom paddle always remains horizontal underneath. The controls are much more snappy overall, and the camera has been pulled back significantly, which makes it easier to react to the many obstacles in each stage. Things no longer feel congested this time around, which is a good thing, but there's a lot more happening here overall. Unfortunately, the hit detection and physics are somehow worse than the original Game Gear. Abysmal, really. There are long stretches where the ball just doesn't go where you want it to, and most of the time it doesn't react appropriately with the position of the paddle. It's a big problem. It's a simple premise: bounce the ball into obstructions, avoid traps, and roll over enemies. I love the concept, but the execution is just terrible. It's as if the developers put the cart before the horse here. Maybe it was too ambitious a goal to create a scrolling action game with the physics of Breakout, or perhaps the developers just rushed this thing out. Either way, it makes for an inconsistent, frustrating experience. The physics are worse, and the paddle collision is inconsistent. Sometimes the ball will just pass through the paddles, which is simply unacceptable. I've tried everything to solve these problems over my many years playing this thing. Swearing at it, slapping the controllers, shouting in agony. Nothing seems to work. Devilish is a terrible time, but I keep returning for more because, again, I like the horror theme and a lot of the ideas here. Every time I pop the cart in, regret washes over me, and I quickly remember why I tend to give up after a few stages. This probably sounds harsh, but I'm not exaggerating. Devilish is just really bad in motion. The excellent music and detailed visuals can't save this thing. Hitoshi Sakimoto's score is mostly a beefed-up version of the Game Gear originals. The compositions are great, and the audio fidelity is crisp, with some really clean separation going on between the treble and bass. There are some scratchy voices here and there, but the music and sound effects are mostly superb. This time around, there's a 2-player option, which has the second player controlling the bottom paddle. It's a cool idea that falls a little flat in execution, since the other person only has control over the ball speed, and is limited to moving along the bottom, meaning they can't really get into the action and are relegated to a defensive position since they can't shift their character vertically. Why? I mean, why does every great idea need to fall flat when it comes to this game? The co-op nature of this option instead of a head-to-head mode is cool, but why limit the mechanics? It's about as fun as collecting stars with a second controller in Super Mario Galaxy, meaning it's limited and not really all that inclusive. Players can adjust the difficulty, the amount of balls to start out with, and listen to the soundtrack in the options. The time trial mode is back as well. Power-ups and traps are much more plentiful this time around. Most buffs can be found in chests across the stages. I didn't mention this in the Game Gear review because they were so limited in that version. There's a red fire dragon upgrade that absolutely devastates everything in its path, a screen wipe nuke, and extra balls lying around. These are all extremely handy because there are no continues from what I can tell. There are red X's strewn across the levels. When you hit these, They disable the controllable top paddle. This is a good idea, but like everything else, it was poorly implemented. These things are everywhere, and the length of time the player is penalized goes on far too long. This wouldn't be a huge problem if the time limit wasn't so strict, but it is, and it's just a hassle. I mentioned the demon head ball suckers when reviewing the original game. They are absent from this 16-bit version, but replaced by toads who do the exact same thing. Later on in the adventure, there are baddies who will tongue your ball as well, in order to hold you back. So these things still literally suck. Devilish doubles down on disabling your movement tenfold in the 5th stage, where the majority of the enemies use electricity to freeze you in place. I'm not going to belabor my point here, but just tell me, does this look fun? The action is barely visible under this water. Fuck me. Just fuck this. There are a lot more boss battles in the next possession, and they have seen a significant jump in quality. Most of their patterns are pretty easy to parse, but there's a lot of variety in the way they look, move, and attack. A couple pose next to no threat, instead relying on light puzzle gimmicks in order to do away with them. This time around, there's also a bonus room where extra balls can be accumulated, but in my many playthroughs, this event occurred very late in the game, so you'll have to make your way through the majority of the adventure before you're given the opportunity to stock up. It's not a bad thing by any means, but one or two earlier rounds would have made the game a lot more fair. Some of this footage is taken from a few runs on the normal difficulty, but I must admit that I had to decrease the challenge in order to see the end credits. A suitable animated closing sequence plays out on easy, but it urges you to replay the game on normal, which isn't something I'll ever do, even if it does present a better finale. It's just not worth the pain. The time limit is far too strict, and this one boss in particular gave me a tough time. It's an easy enough enemy, but it can be rather challenging to hit, and once you've defeated it, you still need to reach the end of the stage, all in the same amount of allotted time. It also doesn't pause during some animated sequences, which is a cruel oversight. Seriously, one would have thought that all of these things would have been figured out for this 16-bit entry, but the timer is as big a pain in the ass as ever. The presentation is excellent overall, with some great use of scaling and scrolling here and there. Fog, clouds, and water effects will occasionally obscure the view of your ball, which is really clever. It works for the most part, but the waterfalls from the first game return and are still a big, jittery nightmare to traverse through. These cogs can also suck it. They should have been scrapped altogether. The ball becomes a janky mess in between the gaps, and you'll need to know exactly how to get it out, because it will drop you into the depths of hell if you don't. These cannons are pretty cool though, and this stage in general really puts the Sega hardware through the paces. Unfortunately, Devilish wasn't optimized very well, so slowdown can occur in moments, such as these. Most of the stages from the Game Gear one are reworked in this version, but they are much longer, with more gimmicks, enemies, and traps. There are also a few branching paths, but they seem to all lead to the same places, which is a wasted opportunity to add some replay value. I really like the way all of the information is laid out vertically down the side of the screen in this one. It's well organized and helps a great deal to know the speed of my ball, how much time I have, and the amount of lives remaining without having to pause the game. At the beginning of each stage, it shows the big bad you'll be encountering, which is a nice touch. Like I said, the presentation is top-notch. The zipper animation is cool, even if it does get a little tiresome when you have to watch it play out while navigating the options screen over and over. It's just too bad the in-game mechanics aren't on the same level as the visuals, because if they were, Devilish could have been a classic. I think it's pretty clear that I don't recommend this game. Still, I've been wanting to cover it for a while, and it's one I return to often. It's a real shame that it plays so poorly, because I legitimately love the concept, as I've now said probably 37 times over the course of these two reviews. With a few tweaks to the gameplay and difficulty, this could have been something really special. As it stands, Devilish is a massive disappointment that makes the mediocre Game Gear one feel like a masterpiece in comparison. There was a DS sequel/remake, but I won't bother looking at that one. It is bland, ugly, and lazily programmed, so next time we'll be looking at something different. Stay tuned.